their quest for economic gain should not compromise our health regulations, which are our safety net for the Canadian public against harms from therapeutic products.
Tamara Ugolini here with Rebel News, and in today's report, I'm going to show you how Health Canada is proposing regulatory changes by the Canadian Minister of Health, that's Jean-Yves Duclos, whose background is based heavily in economics and not at all in health. The regulations are being made under the Food and Drugs Act, and it's around agile licensing, or what some are referring to as expedited approval for drugs that prioritizes industry over the health and safety of Canadians. And joining me now to discuss these proposals is retired pediatric physician Dr. Susan Natche, who is the senior editor for the website and newsletter, the Canadian COVID Care Alliance, as well as co-chair of their communications committee. Check it out. Thank you so much for joining me, Dr. Natche, about these proposed amendments to regulatory approvals through Health Canada. Before we get into that, what kind of products will this affect? So there's the advanced therapeutic products. Can you tell us what those are and what that entails?
Sure, I'll try my best. And I just want to say thank you for give me a chance to raise this issue with my fellow Canadians, because I really think it's important. These advanced therapeutic products haven't really been well defined yet. And that's part of the amendments that they're trying to decide upon, is which products will fit into these categories. What we do know is that they're novel products. And in a number of documents, which you can find on the Canada's website, there are suggestions of products which may be included. So if you look up a document which was produced by the Health and Biosciences Advisory Committee called Targeted Regulatory Review, they list products such as artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, and gene editing as examples of therapeutic products that will be included under these advanced regulatory products. The concern with that is because they're so novel, we don't know what kind of impact they will have on our health and well-being.
Well, and in that, now there are these regulatory approvals for these products. What are the amendments proposing, and how would that affect the process in Canada?
So if I could just go back a little bit, because one of the key components of this is amendments that were made to the Food and Drugs Act in 2019. And these are the kind of what we're calling a backdoor pathway or backdoor access for certain therapeutic products to gain access to the Canadian market. So amendments were made which allowed products to be put on the market without having to have proven safety or efficacy first. And when you think about it, Canadians, we really have been very fortunate, because in the past, we've been able to trust that there are regulations in place which ensure that products are safe and effective before they reach the Canadian market. But this new pathway allows for novel therapeutic products which have unknown side effects and implications on our health to bypass that traditional route and to access the public, as long as the Minister of Health and Health Canada has evidence to support the conclusion that the associated benefits of the product outweigh its risks. And to me, that's very vague language they use. Benefits for who? What are these benefits and what are the risks? And then also that the risks will be adequately managed and controlled, which means we're not going to know and determine the safety of the product before it hits the market. We're going to monitor harms after the product hits the market through pharmacovigilance. With pharmacovigilance, the excuse will always be that correlation is not causation. So the only way to prove harm through scientific study is to have a control group. Well, once you put the product on the market, you've lost your control group. And unless we can definitively say that the harms are attributed to the product, we don't know when they'll meet a threshold that they say that the product is no longer safe.
And so this really makes a rolling application. So we saw throughout the last few years that other novel products were able to be authorized through emergency legislation on what was called a rolling basis. So as long as the pharmaceutical company or the manufacturer continued to submit data as it was collected in real time, then it was said that Health Canada would continue that review process as it literally rolled in. And so this is really making that piece of legislation permanent.
That's right. So that's one of the other amendments, is to put in these rolling reviews. And it's just like you said, they're looking at the product and its safety throughout its life cycle. But what's really concerning is the rolling reviews. They can do the studies kind of collapsed upon one another instead of in a series. And there's a couple of issues with that. The first one is that they're going to use preliminary data to determine if there are benefits. And then to see if it can go through that backdoor pathway, which is in the Food and Drugs Act. But the other concern is that one of the ways to know harm and to prevent harm on the public is to use that series of clinical trials, preclinical trials, and then clinical trials, which, number one, expose fewer people to the product until we have more idea about what its harms will be. But also give us time to learn what those harms will be to the general public before we roll it out as a licensed product.
Now, before we continue, I found it really interesting here that changes to the Food and Drug Act that happened in 2019 were made by the Minister of Industry at the time, who was Yves Duclos, who has now been transferred over and changed seats. He's the Minister of Health, who's now proposing these amendments to, or these regulatory amendments to this same act. Do you find that strange, and could there be kind of a conflict of interest here?
Well, you're absolutely right. When you look back to 2016, when they were proposing the amendments to make this backdoor pathway, the groups who made the recommendations to form this pathway were actually economic advisory committees. So we have economic advisory committees, which were heavily populated by members of industry, making recommendations to adjust our health regulations. So that's, to me, is concerning, because their quest for economic gain should not compromise our health regulations, which are our safety net for the Canadian public against harms from therapeutic products.
You know, and that's really interesting that you say that. And I don't mean to make this all about what we saw unfold over the last 3 years, but we really squashed the economy for health. And so what you've just explained here is the exact reversal of that, where they're upholding economic innovation and at the same time compromising health.
That's right. Yeah, it is funny. When I thought about it as well, like, they did everything out of this abundance of caution to keep us safe. But now it seems like they're introducing these regulations, which I consider to be more deregulations, which are pulling apart the very essence of our safety net to protect the Canadian public. And the other point that you just reminded me of is that health is more than the absence of disease. In the Canada Gazette, where they announced these amendments, they did a cost-benefit analysis, but they neglected to include one really important point, which was the impact on the Canadian public should there be any negative consequences from these drugs or harms. So when you look at Vioxx, I believe there were over 80,000 heart attacks before it got pulled. And when you listen to the work of Edward Dowd, Now, he looks at the American economy, the impact of the harms, but he says a conservative estimate is $150 billion in costs, and that's just to the working class. So imagine the additional impact on children and on the retired population, and the impact on our healthcare system having to care for these people. And he also admits that this doesn't include lost productivity, income, or financial impact. And we have to think one of the motives of this process is to expedite or get products to market faster. But are we compromising public safety to expedite these products getting to market faster? And who does that benefit? And I would argue potentially putting Canadian public at harm is not a benefit to the Canadian public.
Right. And I guess that leads me into my next and final question is, what impact will this have on Canadians and on potentially the healthcare sector? And you answered it a little bit. And where can Canadians go to take some action to prevent this from moving forward so quickly?
Sure. It's hard to predict because there's so much vague language. But what's most concerning for myself and my colleagues is that this new pathway, or the amendments they're suggesting, open the door for using these novel, under-tested, and potentially harmful therapeutic products in healthy Canadians, and as well as in veterinary products, which means it could enter the food supply. And that healthy Canadians who are usually at very limited risk from certain diseases because they are healthy and they have robust immune systems to deal with issues. And then, so they would get little benefit, but exposing them to uncertainties for the harms of these products is quite dangerous and concerning. So what we've done is we've started a petition. It is on the Government of Canada website. It's an e-petition 4448. And what we're asking is to stop the authorization of any therapeutic product for use in healthy Canadians and veterinary products. We want to minimize the exposure of the general healthy population to these products until they've been rigorously tested. And that's the concern. We want products to have been proven safe and effective before they reach the Canadian market, like they always have been. And these novel products, they don't need less clinical trials or investigation. They really deserve more research because, again, there's so many unknowns about this group of products. This really teeters on the edge of informed consent. How can a doctor or another healthcare provider give informed consent to their patients? Or how can we expect to be able to give informed consent if we don't know the potential harms of this product, if we don't know the long-term harms of the product because its access to market was expedited? And I do worry that once these products are put on the market, they will be called safe and effective, which will be a mislabeling, in my opinion. And I think Canadians will really have to reconsider what is meant by the term safe and effective in the future.
If you agree with Dr. Natche that upholding the true meaning of the words safe and effective means not ramming through novel products to Canadian markets by the very companies who will profit from their use and sale, then consider signing the petition that is sponsored by Conservative MP Dean Allison to send a message to the government that disregarding robust safety nets is not acceptable, and demand that Canada institute independent oversight throughout the regulatory process to minimize conflicts of interest. For Rebel News, I'm Tamara Ugolini. As you heard in this report, the Liberals are notorious for ambiguously worded legislation, and that's true with the sweeping internet content bills like Bill C-11. If you would like to ensure that you can continue to access online content like this, such as ours, then head on over to stopthecensorship.ca, sign our petition, and find out how you can get involved with the fight to uphold free expression in Canada. That's stopthecensorship.ca.